The slap was delivered midway through my sentence, not a shove, not a hurled glass. Instead, it was an open-handed slap to my face, witnessed by 11 individuals seated at our birthday dinner table that I had paid for and reserved 3 weeks ahead in a restaurant. The decoration of the venue with flowers she loved took up my entire afternoon that day. The room fell silent only when boundaries thought to be inviolable were breached. For 2 prolonged seconds I remained motionless, my face burning, ears ringing. As candlelight flickered over 12 faces scrutinizing me, 11 guests and Margaret, my wife of 7 years, still maintaining the stance, her hands slightly raised, eyes wide with an unfamiliar, searing wrath that will forever linger in my memory. I refrained from shouting, dramatically standing up or making any outburst like throwing water or overturning the table. I neatly arranged my napkin next to my dish, rose, strolled towards the coat stand by the entryway, donned my coat, and exited Carmen's Italian kitchen on Euclid Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, into a chilly November night that would freeze tears before they could fall. That was the last time Margaret saw me as her husband, and tonight I will share all. If this resonates with you, subscribe, enable notifications, and express your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been publicly embarrassed by someone you trusted? Remain here. This narrative becomes more complex. My name is Elias. I'm 39. I am a civil engineer, and for much of my adult life, I was the sort of man who thought quiet dedication was its own reward. I hail from Findlay, Ohio, a small town with around 40,000 residents positioned midway between Columbus and Toledo. It's the sort of place where everyone recognizes your surname, where your high school football jersey remains in the gymnasium for 15 years, and where they inquire about your father before inquiring about you. My father, Gerald, was a structural engineer, a meticulous man, a reserved man, a man who held that constructing a bridge followed the same principles as crafting a life with patience, precision, understanding that the burden one bears dictates the materials used. He succumbed to a heart attack when I was 24. At that time, I was in my 2nd year of graduate school at Ohio State. That very night I received the call, I returned home, and since then I've been striving to embody the man he was. Migrated to Columbus post-completion of my degree, secured employment at Harlow and Associates, a mid-sized civil engineering firm focusing on highway drainage design. The monotonous, unappreciated nature of the work meant that success was evident only when something went awry, so if you excelled in your role, anonymity was a given. I excelled at my job. Encountered Margaret at a professional gathering in 2013. She attended with a mutual acquaintance. At 31, she was sharp-witted and humorously disarming, lowering defenses before one even realized it. She worked in healthcare marketing, resided near Short North, and held strong opinions about various topics such as dining, cinema, packing a carry-on suitcase properly, or the propriety of using ketchup on scrambled eggs. She imbued spaces with life upon entering them. I fell head over heels for her in roughly 3 weeks. 2 years subsequent, we exchanged vows in a modest wedding at a vineyard near Columbus, with 40 attendees including her parents, sister, college friends, my mother, brother Nate, some close work associates. It was an excellent day, one I recall fondly. The initial few years were genuinely joyous. We acquired a house in Worthington, a 1970s colonial boasting a finished basement and a yard abutting a creek. Over the summer, I refurbished the kitchen by removing the old linoleum, installing new cabinets, and rettling the backsplash. Margaret would often bring me coffee and stand in the doorway, expressing astonishment at marrying someone who possessed practical skills. I thought we were constructing something. However, the flaws began so imperceptibly that I mistakenly considered them as ordinary settling. That's the tricky aspect of structural damage. If you're unaware of the signs, you can witness a foundation shift for years and convince yourself it's harmless. In the 3rd year, Margaret began working longer hours, which wasn't surprising given her company's growth and her promotion. I became responsible for more household chores, cooking, and managing schedules. I thought this was what a partnership entailed. However, a social realm gradually emerged that subtly excluded me. Margaret had a circle of friends, primarily women, along with a few couples who were accustomed to wealth in ways I wasn't, attending private schools, possessing family beach houses, and effortlessly enjoying the casual affluence that permeated every social reference, plan, and assumption about weekend activities. Her closest friend was Brianna, married to a hedge fund manager owning a condo in Aspen, whom she'd casually mentioned during conversations, as others would about their lunch. I didn't belong in that world, and I believe both Margaret and I were aware of it. Yet, for a long time, she pretended it was insignificant. By the 5th year, it had become significant. 1. She began making light, seemingly joking comments that left you questioning your sensitivity. Elias wore an ill-fitting sport coat at the charity event. Elias' story dragged on unnecessarily. Elias lacked knowledge about wine, favoring beer instead. She often expressed these observations with a jest, but her words were sincere. By the 6th year, I started doubting if she was embarrassed by me. I feel compelled to admit something. I'm not a man who readily expresses feelings. I was brought up by a man who demonstrated love through actions, like being dependable and helpful. I didn't have the words to articulate my emotions. I believe that staying silent caused me losses I may never fully recuperate. I should have spoken up sooner. I ought to have sat down and acknowledged what I perceived earlier. I didn't. I went to work. I returned home. I remodeled the upstairs bathroom. Arranged Margaret's 39th birthday dinner on November 9th. She preferred something special and impressive for her friends this year, suggesting Carmen's, the new Italian eatery on Euclid that had been getting favorable reviews in Columbus Monthly. With a fixed menu and a sommelier fluent in wine discourse, it was an ideal choice. Reservation made in October, guest list assembled with Margaret, 11 people, including her closest friends, Sister Dana, husband, 2 co-workers, Brianna and Trevor. Invitations sent via handwritten notes. 3 days before the dinner, I bought a centerpiece arrangement in her favorite colors from a florist in German Village. Left a card on her kitchen counter the morning of her birthday before heading to work, containing 4 carefully chosen sentences, not known for writing easily. 4 sentences took me 20 minutes to perfect. She messaged at midday to verify the reservation hour. Nothing more. This should have hinted at something. I arrived 40 minutes ahead at Carmen's to inspect the setup, speak with the manager, and ensure everything was in order. The flowers were impeccable. They had prepared a private dining room in the back, decorated with warmth and elegance. I ordered a bottle of wine early for the guests. Everyone arrived nearly simultaneously within 20 minutes. Margaret entered with Brianna, an unexpected move. I had expected her to arrive together, but held my peace. I drew out her chair. I filled her glass. I reintroduced myself to a few familiar faces. Dinner proceeded smoothly. The meal was delicious. The dialogue flowed effortlessly as people felt at ease with one another. It was the first moment of relaxation in weeks for me. During the transition between the second and third course, Trevor, Brianna's spouse, discussed a property venture he was managing, mentioning a mixed-use development on the western side. He glanced at me casually and inquired, "Aren't you in construction?" I corrected him politely. "Civil engineering, specifically infrastructure, mainly highway drainage and bridge systems." He gave a casual nod, typically indicative of inattentiveness. "I see, so it's like contract work." "Correct." Margaret chuckled heartily, not the kind of laugh intended to soften a situation. A genuine, spontaneous laugh born from surprise and amusement. "Alias excels at his profession," she shared with the table, still smiling. "He may not seem it, but he's incredibly practical." The conversation momentarily subsided without completely ceasing. Momentary pause occurred as her comment landed unexpectedly. I gazed at my wife of 7 years. In the setup I had prepared, on the birthday I had organized, and I calmly remarked, "Margaret, that's not very considerate." The ensuing silence was distinct, prolonged. Her facial expression changed, and then she struck me. "Margaret, Margaret, Margaret, Midedloaf, a boy trapped in honey can still be harmed by a nut." The Uber I summoned from the sidewalk outside Carmen's dropped me off at home in 14 minutes. I recall observing the city through the windows as it moved by, pondering load balances. Structures collapse not due to one catastrophic event, but due to accumulated stress that exceeds the material's capacity. I had surpassed my limit. I did not weep. Not then. I entered the house, ascended to the bedroom, and sat on the bed's edge for roughly 3 minutes. Then I arose and retrieved 2 suitcases from the closet, beginning to pack meticulously in a manner reminiscent of my father. I organized items such as clothing, documents, my project files on the hard drive, my old drafting compass of my father's, a photograph from Christmas 2 years ago featuring my mother and brother, my laptop, and nothing else that belonged to us both. Completing the task in 45 minutes, I phoned my brother Nate from the driveway, who resides in Dayton. He answered promptly on the second ring, and I informed him about the situation, to which he responded instantly, "Come here tonight. Immediately, stay put." Later, as I traveled along I-70, Margaret texted me thrice. I didn't read any of her messages until the following morning. The first said, "Where are you?" The second one expressed regret for losing her temper, and the third message remains unread to this day. "Let's have a conversation," the third person suggested, addressing Elias. I implore you to return home for a mature discussion. I found them seated at Nate's kitchen table over coffee at 7 in the morning, and thereafter I set my phone on the table and divulged everything to Nate. Everything, not merely the slap, but the decades that had preceded it, the comments, the humiliation, and my transformation into a marginal figure in my own marriage, relegated to being a minor character in my wife's social sphere. Nate is 3 years my senior, with 2 children and a wife who coaches middle school soccer, and he spends his weekends restoring vintage motorcycles in his garage. He is the most uncomplicated individual I am acquainted with. He listened attentively to all I said without interruption, and then he inquired, "Aren't you aware that you won't be returning?" I was already cognizant of this fact. The following week, I engaged an attorney in Columbus, a woman named Sandra Park, recommended by a colleague. She was methodical, straightforward, devoid of drama. When I described the predicament, she posed a single question. "Are you aiming for negotiation or seeking an exit?" I opted for the latter. She confirmed she could arrange it. The divorce lasted 9 months. Margaret resisted on the house. There were possessions I had legal rights to that I voluntarily relinquished, as I didn't wish to battle for them over the years. I departed Columbus with my engineering license, savings, my father's drafting compass, and a renewed sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in quite some time. I secured a new role at HDR Engineering, a larger infrastructure firm stationed in Pittsburgh. Challenging assignments. I was assigned to a bridge renovation project on Interstate 376 over the Monongahela River. This was precisely the type of task my father would have admired. It involved intricate load analysis and working with an historically significant structure that required updated performance standards. The kind of job where you arrive each day, aware that your efforts matter even though they may never be recognized by those outside the industry. I leased an apartment in Lawrenceville, a Pittsburgh neighborhood that truly embodies charm. With its vintage brick structures, excellent coffee spots, and locals conversing on the sidewalks, it's unlike any other. Each morning I jogged alongside the river. I opted to cook my meals at home. My work schedule was demanding, yet I relished the solitude upon returning home, which felt liberating rather than lonely. In the initial year, my social life was minimal, a situation that suited me fine as I sought tranquility for self-reconstruction. The second year, I joined a weekly poker game hosted by a coworker's residence. It was just 6 men, a $20 buy-in, and food that was honestly terrible, but the conversations were genuinely captivating. One of those men was Owen Page, a structural engineer who grew up in Pittsburgh and knew every contractor and developer in western Pennsylvania personally. Over time, Owen became one of my most cherished friends. He's the kind of person who makes you feel truly recognized. In the third year, I began taking on projects outside HDR for consultation. I met Owen, who introduced me to developer Bruce Whitfield, specializing in mid-rise residential projects in East Liberty. With expertise in both structural and drainage aspects, I worked on projects for Bruce, which turned out successful. Subsequently, Bruce introduced me to his investor group, a gathering of about 12 to 15 individuals including business owners, commercial real estate developers, lawyers, and fund managers, who met quarterly at a Shadowside club for deal flow sharing, project discussions, and opportunity vetting. The group, informal and nameless, consisted of trustworthy people who had collectively built projects. After approximately 8 months, Bruce mentioned the group was expanding to a second chapter in my hometown, Findlay, Ohio. He planned a launch dinner there during late spring and invited me as part of the Pittsburgh delegation, marking my return to Findlay after 4 years. Without a moment's pause, I agreed. My mother continued to reside there, alongside Aunt Patricia. Truth be told, a fragment of me yearned to experience the sensation of returning as someone transformed from the one who departed. On a crisp May Thursday, I navigated towards Findlay. Initially, I visited my mother's abode, located on a tranquil street adjacent to Riverside Park, the same house where Nate and I spent our formative years. Despite her painting the front door a deep blue since my father's passing and cultivating a garden along the walkway that my father had always promised to tend, she still resided there. We shared coffee on the back porch for 2 hours, during which she asked me thoughtful questions about my life. I confessed to her honestly about how Pittsburgh had blossomed for me. That evening's gathering was at the Findlay Country Club, attended by approximately 30 individuals, the Pittsburgh crowd, the local Findlay group, a few guests from Columbus and Toledo. It was a dinner where everyone carried a business card and greeted with a firm handshake. The discussion carried a lively atmosphere of individuals who had accomplished something tangible and were eager to discuss more. I was engrossed in a dialogue about infrastructure and investments in secondary markets when my phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar Columbus number. Stepping out into the hallway, I picked up. "Is this Elias Carver?" "Indeed, it is. This is Phil Reeves, an attorney from Columbus. I'm phoning because I represent a party in an estate matter and your name has cropped up in relation to some documents we are examining." He paused. "This call requires caution in delivery of certain information. Are you in a private location?" I confirmed that I was. "Mr. Carver," he said, "I must disclose that your ex-wife, Margaret, passed away 6 days ago." The hallway of the Findlay Country Club is adorned with photos of its members dating back to the 1940s, row after row of formal portraits showcasing serious Ohio faces. Standing there, I didn't focus on anyone, my hand pressed against the wall, as Phil Reeves detailed the events surrounding the woman who meant more to me than anything else in life, Margaret. 14 months prior, she was diagnosed with an aggressive type of ovarian cancer and kept her condition hidden from many. She continued working for as long as she could before eventually stopping. Approximately 4 months before her death, she moved in with her sister Dana and Dana's husband. In hospice care at 43 years old, she peacefully passed away. Phil Reeves also disclosed something else. Margaret had penned letters, multiple ones, during her final weeks, one for her sister, another for her closest companions, and a third for me. He informed me that a package containing my letter had been sent to my mother's address in Findlay, according to Margaret's wishes, since I hadn't provided her with my current Pittsburgh address. The package arrived at my mother's residence 2 days ago. She hadn't disclosed the illness details as she wasn't certain if Margaret had already shared it with me, and she aimed to avoid causing me distress at an event of significance for me. I expressed gratitude towards Phil Reeves for the phone call. I re-entered the dining room and communicated to Bruce that I needed to depart early. I bid farewell to the acquaintances I had made. I drove to my mother's residence where she was still awake. The parcel was on the kitchen table. She stood beside me as I opened it. Inside was a solitary handwritten letter, consisting of 7 pages on ordinary white paper, front and back, in Margaret's handwriting that I would identify anywhere. "I won't read you every line of it, but some parts belong to me alone. However, I will share the gist." She informed me she had invested 2 years post-divorce in therapy, collaborating with a psychologist in Columbus to grasp her actions and their reasons. In the course of her work, she realized that her actions during our late marriage years were a form of theatrical display, not intended for me, but for Brianna and her sphere, a circle she had long sought to join since college, never fully managing to do so. She expressed feeling ashamed, not about me, but about her own insecurities, which she projected onto the one individual who had never provided reason for such feelings. She detailed the slap explicitly, describing it as the most abhorrent act she'd ever committed. She admitted that she had never experienced a greater sense of humiliation than in the instant following the slap, not due to the spectators, but because of the expression on my face. She said I looked at her like one looks upon something finally comprehended. She explained that for 3 years, she had attempted to connect with me, yet could never find the strength to do so. She expressed gratitude for my creation in Pittsburgh, having discreetly learned about it through shared acquaintances. She mentioned Dana, who was tasked with gathering this information gently. She'd heard I was engaged in substantial endeavors and surrounded by quality individuals. Her apology wasn't typical. It was sincere, devoid of any implied obligation. She revealed something new. After the divorce, she distanced herself from Brianna and her circle, finding their acceptance increasingly burdensome to attain. Instead, she devoted time to Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, contributing administratively to their development department. This, she declared, was the first meaningful activity she had undertaken in a long while. She expressed that she died, comforted by the knowledge of being cherished by individuals who truly recognized her identity, and wished for my own self to be similarly authentic. Following the completion of reading, I remained in my mother's kitchen for an extended period. My mother prepared additional coffee and presented a meal before me, which I didn't consume. She seated herself opposite me and allowed the quietness to unfold naturally. She has always been adept at discerning when to communicate and when to merely be present, and that evening she recognized there was no spoken solace for my emotional turmoil. My feelings were not solely sorrow, but rather a complex emotion akin to mourning, a chapter I believed was already concluded. only to discover it harbored unread pages. I lamented the woman she could have become had she found her true self sooner. I also grieved the years within our marriage when I was gradually fading away and didn't know how to halt the process. 7 years ago, under the chill of November, a parking lot where an apology should have been spoken instead became a recipient of a belated one in my mother's kitchen through a letter. Repairs were impossible then, it could only be acknowledged. Yet I experienced something unexpected. Gratitude was what stirred within me, not for her absence or the pain, but for the effort she made. She had the courage to visit a therapist, to confront herself truthfully and admit her wrongdoings. 7 pages of handwritten confession were sent to me, a testament of her desire for sincerity in our relationship before time ran out. Courage, I came to realize, is not something I fully grasped until those pages were in my hands. People are complex entities. This isn't comforting, it's just accurate. The woman who struck me was genuine. The one who penned those 7 pages was real too. She was the same woman, and I had loved her, but she let me down, and she knew it, yet didn't utter a word of apology before she passed. For 4 days, I stayed in Findlay, sharing breakfast with my mother every morning. I drove by my former high school, the park where my father took us fishing, and the hardware store parking lot where I started my first job at 15. I spent some time at the cemetery, placing a hand on my father's tombstone, informing him about the bridge project, Pittsburgh, the club dinner, and Margot's letter. I don't know if he heard me, but I think it mattered that I spoke. On the second day, I phoned Owen from the Sandusky Street coffee shop parking lot, filling him in on what transpired. Owen, as always, listened attentively, without hastily jumping to conclusions. After completing, he asked, "Are you all right?" I affirmed, expressing my sincerity in a way that conveyed more than a simple yes. He responded, inviting me to return when ready, and suggested we conclude the East Liberty proposal as Whitfield's impatience mounts and his calculations were required by Friday. This prompted my first genuine laughter in 3 days. Such behavior is emblematic of friendship. It signifies concern for your well-being and understanding that the best aid comes in the form of work waiting and the knowledge that you are indispensable. On my last night in Findlay, I made my way to the Blanchard River just before sunset. A leisurely, wide river flowing along the town's western border. It is surrounded by cottonwoods, farmland, and the occasional osprey platform erected a decade ago by the county. I spent many Sundays fishing there with my father, not for the catch, but for the shared experience. I stood there observing the water flow under the evening light, reflecting on my father's words about bridges. "A bridge doesn't resist the load," he explained when I was around 12 years old, as we watched a freight train pass over the old railroad bridge north of town. Instead, it accommodates, redistributes, and finds a way to bear what is placed upon it without shattering. The engineer's role is to ensure the structure knows how to do that. I contemplated Margot. I reminisced about the 7 years we constructed together and the night they ended. I pondered the letter and the late apology, which could not reverse the past but was early enough to influence something. I recalled Pittsburgh, the bridge over the Monongahela, Owen, the peaceful apartment in Lawrenceville, the poker game, the investor dinner, the journey home to Findlay, and my mother's kitchen table. I contemplated my father's drafting compass, constantly present in my car bag, a familiar weight I carried regardless of its practicality. Life's load, what we take on, what we pass off, and what we manage to shoulder. Unbroken, never broken, I had merely yielded like resilient material, returning to my original form. What puzzles a quaint entity? Upon arrival in the early afternoon, I parked on my street in Lawrenceville, ascended to my apartment with my bag, brewed coffee at the kitchen table, and delved into Owen's notes about the East Liberty proposal, resuming my work. What confounds? That week, I completed the drainage calculations. The proposal was submitted Thursday, accepted Friday. 3 days later, the plan commenced. Months subsequently, construction began on the East Liberty development. Currently, the largest residential project I oversee from ground layout to site drainage system is unprecedented in my career. Upon completion, approximately 300–400 residents will inhabit this structure. They will be unaware of my involvement. The structural engineer who planned the drainage system once left a life that was suffocating him, packing up at midnight and driving to his brother's house in Dayton. The occupants will merely reside there securely within a load-bearing structure. This suffices me. It exceeds my expectations. I still possess Margot's letter, hidden in the same cedar box with my father's drafting compass, a family photograph, and other cherished items that evoke sentiments I struggle to express verbally. I have reread this letter twice since the initial encounter. I believe I will not read it many more times. I no longer visit that source, not due to any pain it may cause, but because I have extracted all I could from it, akin to one no longer needing to revisit the place where one learned to walk. I've granted her forgiveness, not for her benefit, as she is gone, but for mine. My father instilled in me the wisdom that one should not burden structures unnecessarily, rather distribute and let pass through. At 39 years old, I am a civil engineer based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, engaged in meaningful projects with trusted associates. I'm no longer the man who spoke in a restaurant on Euclid Avenue, desperately trying to say the right words to one who had ceased to listen. I'm not the man who drove to Dayton at midnight, questioning what went awry. Instead, I am the man who gathered my belongings and vanished, constructing something tangible from the remnants. If there's anything I am certain about, anything I wish to convey to whoever's engrossed in this narrative, no matter where you are or what time frame reflects your past, it is this. Life's hardships that seem about to shatter you are precisely the ones that reveal your true mettle. It isn't until you face adversity that you uncover your resilience. You don't find your inner strength when life is smooth sailing. Instead, it surfaces in the parking lot of a restaurant in November with a scorching cheek and a folded napkin with nowhere to go but onward. You are destined for greater things than what you've experienced thus far. Believe that. Persevere, be present. The path ahead will hold firm. What strikes me the most about Elia's tale isn't the slap, it's the 7 years preceding it. The gradual, silent erosion of a man who persisted, who constructed, who loved, while another was slowly teaching him to feel insignificant. That is the true injury, not the instant when everything shatters. The years you spent shrinking to fit a mold that never suited you. In this moment, if you find yourself there, listen to me. Departing isn't forfeiting. Occasionally, stepping through that threshold will be your strongest action. Elias did not merely endure, he evolved, and the same can happen to you.